This is video 4 in a 4-part series of how to reverse trauma's effect on the brain, particularly the prefrontal cortex. In the first video, we talked about the overall impact on the prefrontal cortex, and in videos 2, 3, and 4, which is this video, we talk about specific regions of the prefrontal cortex, what their responsibilities are, how trauma affects them, and how you can start to change them through the power of what's called neuroplasticity, which is, for me, the biggest hope engendering thing has come out a couple of decades ago, is that from the cradle to grave, you can actually rewire your brain through different techniques and approaches. Hi, my name is John Hawkins Jr. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, certified trauma specialist, and co-founder of Hawkins Counseling Center. In this video, we're going to talk about the anterior cingulate cortex. In video number 2, we broke down one section, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Video number 3, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. And in this video, the anterior cingulate cortex. So we will now, from this point forward, refer to it as the ACC, so I don't have to say anterior cingulate cortex 50 more times. So this part of the brain has 7 primary responsibilities. And as I go through these, you might notice some parallels to the dorsolateral or the ventromedial parts of the prefrontal cortex. So they each have some specific things they do, but there's a lot of overlap as well. So I'm also going to give you in this video 7 things you can do to promote positive change in the ACC. So if you've watched all the videos made through the whole series, one, good for you. That tells me you're really dedicated to getting help and change and achieving your life goals. But also you'll see the overlap. So then some of these exercises or interventions I'm promoting they're similar to some of the ones in video 2 and 3. And the positive part of that is you can do some of those things and they affect all 3 areas positively. So it's not like you need to do specific different ones for every single aspect of the brain. So the first responsibility of the ACC is what's called error detection and conflict monitoring. So this part of the brain will track our current behaviors and see, are those aligned with the goals and outcomes we're really trying to achieve, and then it will make adjustments, give us feedback on that to make actions that are more aligned with what we're trying to achieve. The second area is attention allocation. And so that part of the brain, the ACC, will regulate attention and direct cognitive resources towards the tasks and objectives we're trying to work on and achieve, and filter out distractions. So you can see already, if I've got impairment in these areas of the brain, it's going to make it really challenging for me to achieve a lot of my goals. It's going to be frustrating, take me longer. I may not pick up on information, so I keep repetitively doing something that's not working because I lack the self-awareness of it. The third area is emotional regulation. And so the ACC contributes to our ability to regulate our reaction to something, the intensity level of that. It also helps us manage complex internal conflicting emotions. You might have conflicting goals. I want to, look good and feel fit in my, bathing suit and clothes, and I also want to stuff my face with this whole chocolate cake. So that area of the brain kind of helps regulate or modulate that. And the last area is it really does help direct our behaviors to be more in alignment with those, effective actions and use our emotional energy effectively. The fourth area is pain processing. So the ACC helps us assess the significance of a pain. It helps modulates our perception of that pain. And then it influences our emotional and behavior responses to that pain. So maybe, somebody gets in pain, they seek out drugs and alcohol, binge eating food, get really reactive. They're having a hard time managing their experience of the pain and coping with it effectively. And there's an example I use sometimes. I'm not advocating this by any means, but it shows you the magnitude of how subjective our experience of pain is. So in the late stages of the Vietnam War, there were some Buddhist monks that were protesting the war, and they had become so adept at separating themselves from some of their physical pain experiences that they lit themselves on fire and sat there and burned alive calmly to their death. So again, I'm not advocating I would do this, but I'm showing an extreme example of how subjective pain can be and how much you can start to take control of your pain. So even if there is a medication needed and things like that, there's many proactive things you can do as well to manage your pain level. The fifth area is decision making and risk assessment. So the ACC helps us weigh the pros and cons of certain choices or decisions And it also integrates information from multiple parts of the brain that it can increase our ability to make adaptive decision-making in complex situations. The sixth area is social cognition. So the ACC can really help us understand others' emotions, perceptions, intentions. So it increases our capacity for empathy and more effective social interactions. I would say, even though all the impairments in these areas can cause, dysfunction in a person's life, I would say this is probably one of the primary ones, is when you're so affected socially, where not that I'm not a compassionate or empathetic person, but I'm diminished in my ability to be able to do that. So I can't manage conflict effectively, sustain long-term relationships. It's really gonna impede that ability. But we're gonna get to some things in a little bit here of how you can start to shift that at a neurological level and get an increased ability in that area. All of my clients have been able to do this to some degree. I mean, you can make these changes, just depends where you're starting from, how much work it's gonna take, but you can get to where you wanna go. The final area, number 7, is cognitive control and response inhibition. So the ACC is really responsible, going back to number 3 with the emotional regulations, for down-regulating and controlling and suppressing impulses that are not effective, and developing my ability to reflect and think and come up with more effective, thoughtful responses. So those are the 7 main responsibilities of the ACC. Now I want to give you 7 things you can do to start to create the neuroplasticity I was talking about a second ago. So some of these, again, are going to cross over with video number 2 and 3 because they're so effective in addressing deficits in all these areas. So the first one is mindfulness meditation. And this can really increase the ACC's ability to focus on attention, detect conflict, manage my emotions more effectively. The parts of the brain that get stimulated during mindfulness meditation really control all these areas. There's, buildings worth of data now on the positive impact of mindfulness meditation. It also helps create links between the ACC and other brain regions. So it's getting more effective information, but because it's creating those neurological links, it's also helping down-regulate some of those ineffective impulse or overreactive emotional responses. The ACC can start taking much more control over those things. I know a lot of my clients, when I say the word meditation, their eyes immediately roll back and they say, oh, I can't do meditation, I've tried. I can't get into all that in depth in this video. I'm gonna have some specific videos where we speak to that. But what I want you to do is just be open-minded. If you have trouble, it's so worth the investment because it's so valuable to creating neurological changes, neuroanatomical changes in the brain. Probably one of the things you can do more than anything else to start restructuring your brain is mindfulness meditation. So whether you want to do something with movement like a yoga class or martial arts, or take a mindful walk and just try to pay attention to everything you see or everything you hear or what you're thinking as you're walking, and just have something I can focus my attention on. If it is a struggle for you, great, you just got an amazing mindfulness meditation. The harder it is to do, the more you're gonna activate regions of that part of your brain. And scale it down, 60 seconds, 30 seconds, like a minute and a half. Start somewhere that you can feel like I can attain, I can get some momentum, and start to create that neuroplasticity. The second area that you can make positive changes is in cognitive training. So again, this doesn't need to be a big formal thing like a cognitive training program, but if you can, that's great. But things that challenge focus, attention, like puzzles, memory problems, certain video games where you have to go back and remember things that were there prior. Anything that does that is going to stimulate activity and, again, keep creating neurological links to other brain regions, which will give the ACC, as well as other aspects of the prefrontal cortex, more top-down control over some of these bottom-up processes like energy in the body, emotions, physical sensations. The more I can create those links, the more I can start to control and start to have more adaptive, behaviors and actions, and start to achieve my outcomes that I'm trying to strive for. Area number 3 is physical exercise. And again, that doesn't mean you need to be a pro athlete or train for the Olympics, but just some consistent, particularly aerobic exercise. So much of the research that I've read is around aerobic exercise. Not only does it increase blood flow and oxygen to the brain, but I think I mentioned in video 2 or 3 that it triggers a hormone called BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor, that enhances cell size in the brain, communication between cells. It really increases your capacity for neuroplasticity. So physical exercise, just getting your heart rate up a little bit, 60%, 65% of your max. A rough rule of thumb is you can take 220 minus your age and divide that by 65.65. So that will give you kind of a target range. So again, it doesn't need to be like really overly strenuous things where, for some of you the exercise may be challenging, but just to start to get some of that created, it will really help you start to increase your capacity for neuroplasticity. The fifth area is cognitive flexibility training. So this doesn't need to be an overly formalized thing. There are formal programs that can be great if you want to engage in those, but the ACC is part of the brain that's responsible for flexibility and creativity, problem solving, adapting to new situations and circumstances. So things that will trigger the part of the ACC are things like learning a new language, playing a musical instrument, any creative endeavor, something new that you're doing. You can also look at that, like I said, there are formalized programs where you could take a step back, problem solving, any games like that are going to stimulate part of the ACC. So and some of those activities can be very, very fun, pleasurable, rewarding, but realizing that I'm actually enhancing neuroplasticity in that part of the brain, helping heal my developmental trauma by doing something I actually might enjoy. The sixth area is social engagement. So the ACC has a big role in modulating our social interactions, our ability to have empathy. So like I was mentioning before in some of the impacts from developmental trauma, this is an area where stimulating activity through social interaction will over time start to increase my ability to take in others' perspective or have empathy or start to understand others' emotional experiences or thought processes without being threatened by them or reactive to them. There's a lot of people, again, accused of being self-focused, which I know their heart, and it's not narcissistic or egotistical, it's just deficits in these areas because that part of the brain is not working correctly. They haven't had the experiences through relational interactions to imprint that in the ACC and other parts of the brain. So again, I think I spoke in the last video, I know that can be challenging when you've had developmental trauma and people have betrayed your trust or abandoned you or different things like that, but just start somewhere. If it's getting into a Facebook group or somewhere where maybe there's less risk than a face-to-face, but I would say just start where you can start and get moving. But social interaction is one of the biggest things that's going to start to shift that part of the brain. I mean, all these things are relational wounds of how we all ended up in these places, those of us who've had developmental trauma. And it's really only relationships that are going to ultimately heal you. The relationship you have with yourself, with others, is going to have a bigger impact on the brain than almost anything else. I know a lot of my clients have for years read tons of books and watched videos, and that's all great, and I encourage them to do so. But sometimes they'll use that as a defense mechanism from actually interacting with other people. They want to just be able to heal through knowledge, and knowledge is not going to create the neuroplasticity that's actually going to rewire the brain. So I encourage you to just get out there, take a risk, a graded risk, whatever you can do, just to get that process started. The seventh and final area is reducing chronic stress, which I know, again, if you've got developmental trauma, if you've got complex PTSD, is a big task because for decades in many cases, you've had cortisol and adrenaline just flooding your system. But chronic stress has a negative impact on the ACC and all the brain for that matter. So when we're supposed to get a stress response to something, whether it's a project, a bill, some physical threat, we address it, the brain will initially shoot cortisol and adrenaline into our system. Then once we've addressed the threat and resolved it, then it resets itself through the parasympathetic system to bring us back into kind of a coherent, balanced state. But when you've just been constantly pumping those chemicals out, they're neurotoxic to the brain. And again, also create impairment in memory, focus, attention, all that kind of stuff. So things I would say like stress management techniques, spirituality, health and wellness. You can take things that lower cortisol levels or increase GABA or serotonin naturally. Amino acids are where our neurotransmitters come from. So looking at some of these things, you can even get tested for that. There are many online sites You can test your current neurotransmitter levels, or a functional medical doctor can do that as well. And then you can have some targeted interventions about how to manage stress. So I think with chronic stress, it's not like a one light switch thing. I would look at it comprehensively, whether it's what I'm putting in my body, the sleep I'm getting, which again, I know having developmental trauma can create a lot of sleep disruptions with nightmares, with insomnia, with overactivation of my sympathetic nervous system that make it hard to relax or hard to calm down. But that's where you do need some outside interventions. I like to try to do things holistically first. If we still aren't totally getting there, temporarily maybe using a medication until the person can get in a zone that they're working through their trauma and doing these activities, and they're in a much better place and they can taper off. But I would say a big percentage of people can do that through diet, nutrition, supplementation, engaging in things that are pleasurable. Whether that's being on the water or walking in nature, different things like this, your connection with something more meaningful, with spirituality. Just look at all the different ways maybe you could work towards lowering chronic stress. And again, I would encourage you to be self-compassionate, patient. Just start where you can start and start steadily working on these things. Imperfectly, but consistently imperfect is what I would encourage you to do. So I hope that you've benefited from these 4 videos and you've got some resources, not just some understanding, but some activities that you can do to kind of take charge of your life, to start to create positive changes in your brain. If there's anything my wife and I can do at our center here, as far as if more information we can provide on these topics, or if you'd like to meet with either one of us, just contact hawkinscounselingcenter.com. We'd be more than happy to speak with you or guide you in the right direction of where you could get help in any form. If you believe these have benefited you or could benefit someone you love or care about, please forward them on. Our sole motivation in producing these videos is just to get good information out there. When I started as a therapist, way better now. There's a lot of YouTube channels, a lot of YouTube videos out there that are giving people good information, but I just found there was such a deficit. People that had been to therapy for decades were never hearing some of the information that I was giving them in the first 5 minutes. And so I really just want to get good stuff out there for you so you can heal and, transform what you've gone through and achieve what you're capable of. So we'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.